This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Rada back again with episode 57 of A Geek Leader, and today we have Scott Drake on the podcast. And Scott is the Vice President of Technology for a medical education firm, and he's also the author of the Programmer's Hiring Playbook, a crash course to interviewing and hiring your real-world needs. And he's the founder of and cultivator for LearnLeadership.org, which is a site to help people figure out what ideas they need to learn about leadership. And today we talked about lots of things, including hiring. We talked about the 4 levels of leadership and how to get involved with the LearnLeadership.org website and cultivating that stuff. So this is a great podcast. I really enjoyed it, and give it up for Scott Drake. All right, and we're live, and I've got Scott Drake here with me. And Scott, we met a couple of years ago at a conference. So we both had leadership talks, and I think that was kind of interesting. We had some good conversations there. And I want to just let you tell the audience a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are in technology, and kind of what was your origin story. And then we'll just take it from there.
Sure. John's good to catch up again. So I started... right now I'm a vice president of technology for a medical education company called ScholarRx, and we are our mission is to how do we better educate the next generation of doctors. So that's kind of what I do day wise. But I have moved at this point. About 2 years ago, I stopped coding altogether and moved completely into a leadership position. So that's been an interesting transition for the last couple of years. But I started in tech in the mid '90s, right around when the web was coming out, and I was actually working as a subpar graphic designer and sometimes columnist for the student newspaper, the University of Kentucky. And the advisor approached me and said, "Hey, there's this interesting thing that Tennessee is doing with their student newspaper. You think you can do it with us?" And I went home on Christmas break, and I bought the one book I could find on the web, which was a book on the web browser Mosaic, and taught myself how to code HTML, put up the first website in early 1995, and was just kind of hooked at that point. And started programming to do production systems. We were a daily college newspaper, so putting 30 new pages up every night got a little bit labor intensive. So I started working with a couple of CS majors around campus, and they taught me some programming stuff, and I just taught myself programming, and started working professionally in publishing. And 3 or 4 years later, landed out of Microsoft because there was a real shortage of JavaScript developers back when JavaScript first came out, and I'd been working with it for a little while. And then ended up down at the Valley for a little while, and came back to Kentucky, which is where I'm from, and I've been back here for 10, 15 years, and I've done a whole lot of stuff. So it's been a long and varied career in tech.
Nice. Your origin story is not too far away from mine. I remember I was in college when I first started picking up doing things on the web, and at the time our college didn't even have we had a general, it was like a front page website,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Way back then, and just trying to learn HTML and figure things out, and that's kind of what led me down the path of technology as well.
Yeah, we didn't have tables, we didn't have CSS, we didn't have anything. We just had basic HTML, and Perl.
Perl. Yeah, fun stuff.
Yeah.
So you moved into leadership. What was that transition like for you? Well, for me, I know it was a big struggle because I thought I knew everything, and my ego was preventing me from learning the things that I did. And I think your transition was a little bit different than mine. But what was it like?
Well, yeah, it was painful. I mean, it was good at times and it was painful at times. So there's obviously a lot of lessons learned. Yeah, but the first time I was asked to lead, I had left Microsoft and gone back to Kentucky, and about a year later, I got a call from my boss from Microsoft. And he's like, "Hey, I'm down in the Valley starting a company. Why don't you come out and lead this team?" And I had not really, I was kind of, it wasn't really the lead on the team out of Microsoft, but I was kind of the more senior, and me and another guy kind of split up. But this was really my first, when I went out to the Silicon Valley, it was my first real true lead role. And, I kind of made a lot of mistakes because I made some assumptions that weren't really accurate. Like, you feel like as the lead, you've got to be the best technologist. And your ego is really kind of wrapped up in, I'm the best technologist, and I have to be the best technologist, otherwise I wouldn't be the lead. But I quickly learned that by, injecting myself into all the problems and not giving people, room and space to solve problems and to help me, that I quickly became a micromanager, and I quickly became a roadblock and a bottleneck that all the problems had to go through. And, I ended up with a kind of a bored team and an overworked me. And, it wasn't a smooth transition, but, luckily there's enough demand in tech that there's plenty of second chances. So, that project, we ended up running out of money. And so I came back to Kentucky and, over the years kind of picked up, lead roles again and tried to do better and those things. But yeah, it was an eye opener, right? There's a lot of counterintuitive things about leadership that you think you understand it. You think you know what you're going to get into when you get into it. Did you get there and you're like, nah, I don't think I was right on that one. So.
Yeah, I've definitely fallen in those traps so many times where I thought that I knew this is exactly the right thing to do, and it turned out I was not right at all.
Yeah, and if you stop and you step back and you go, what do I want in a boss, right? Do I want a boss who's the big dog, who big dogs me all the time, who's always right, who always feels like he has to be right? Right? Or do I want a boss who will challenge me and give me space to go solve problems, right? Do you want a boss who brings you problems, or do you want a boss who brings you all these little tasks that you have to do, right? That to meet his or her vision of the solution. And it's a really simple answer. You want to be challenged and you want to be given space and freedom. But so many of us, when we first go into leadership, we take the complete opposite approach because there is that idea. I like to ask that question a lot is do you think you have to be a great technologist to be a good tech leader? And everybody's initial reaction is yes. But if you stop and think about it, it really isn't. I mean, you have to understand the problems of technical teams so that you can help them. You have to know to ask good questions, and you have to know to challenge them just to make sure the decisions are good. But if you are trying to be a leader and be able to solve all the technical problems yourself, there's just no way you can do it. Nobody can keep that much straight and keep that far ahead of technology. You have to accept that, technically I've got to let them be better than me. And it's not my job to be the big dog in that way.
Yeah,
so it's hard. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. You have to, if you don't step out of the way, you're going to end up being the bottleneck for your team, and the technology will never get greater than what you can comprehend, and one person just can't handle it when you have a team of like 10.
Yeah. Which is counterintuitive, right? I mean,
it is, absolutely. Because you think if you want to be the leader of techies, you've got to know all the tech. Yeah. But leadership is something different than that, and I think that's where we need to focus when it comes to when you move into that leadership role. So you mentioned, early on that you had some challenges. It wasn't easy. What was kind of your biggest mistake or one of your big failures when it came to leadership?
So probably my biggest that I would consider a catastrophic failure. Like I had problems early on that I wasn't delegating. And if you were on the outside looking in, you would go, boy, Scott's really working hard and the team's kind of floating. But the team was floating because I wasn't using them well, right? But ultimately we delivered and it wasn't efficient, but it wasn't a catastrophic mistake. I think my first catastrophic mistake was in hiring. And again, I kind of if you look around at the industry, you'll see stuff like, Joel Spolsky and the Gorilla Guide, the interviewing and some of that kind of stuff that really advocate you've got to go out and you've got to hire these superstar, rock star developers. And, you've got to test for all these whiteboard things, you got to do these kind of things. And the first time I really participated in hiring, I was focused on really getting a great person technically. And unfortunately, we hired someone who was good technically and a terrible teammate and toxic in a way. And he was a really nice guy, but he was just impossible to work with. And what ended up happening is it basically blew up the whole team. 18 months later, I was quitting. Right, because my boss, I knew day two that we had made a mistake, but my boss felt like he could fix it. Mm-hmm. So for the year and a half, I grinded it out trying to get done what I could, and put up with being thrown on the bus and being blamed for every problem, and this guy not taking responsibility for anything, and this guy putting completely unrealistic demands on everybody in the team, and just being a bad teammate. So the first catastrophic mistake I made was listening to the common wisdom of the industry and this whole notion that you've got to hire these rock stars. When the problems we had, he was bored, right? He was bored with most 80% of the work in tech is routine, right? Is data entry, reporting, processes, and workflow. There's nothing technically innovative about the bulk of the work in tech. Right. So this guy was bored out of his mind. So he was inventing challenges that we didn't need to be inventing. Right. Because that's what he needed to do to make things interesting to him. And so what I learned really, really hard, and a really hard lesson, was hiring is much more about fit. And it's much more about what are my real world needs and who's going to enjoy those, who's going to find what I need to be done challenging and interesting. And that's far more important than a lot of the things that the industry tends to kind of put out there. So that was my first big mistake.
Yeah, I've had trouble with that as well. I know early on in my career, I had a really high turnover rate. So I had to hire a lot, and I was all about just trying to get someone to fill the seat quickly that had the skills, that checked the technical check boxes. And I could not figure out for the life of me why people were quitting,
Yep.
And it was because they weren't a good fit and because I wasn't leading them properly. It's a combination kind of the two. And once I got myself figured out, as far as how do I communicate to people, how do I lead people, how do I get out of people's way, then it was how do I get the right person that fits our team, because our team is unique and every team is unique.
Every team is unique.
It's all about getting that right person. So what are some resources that people can kind of go to if they need to figure out hiring?
Well, to plug my own book, I wrote a book called The Programmer Hiring Playbook that you can get on Amazon. Where and in it I talk about a few other books. So I can dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that I found inspirational, which was Daniel Pink's book Drive. So if you understand motivation, then it should motivation. What motivates people, which is purpose, growth, autonomy, is what Pink breaks it down to, which I think you've covered in some of your other podcasts. But if you can learn to hire for those things, then you will just from the get-go have improved engagement and morale and some of those kinds of things as well. So, definitely dig into motivation. I think Patrick Lencioni in the book The Advantage does a great job of breaking down culture and values, and how you're trying to hire for people who kind of share your code of conduct, your natural code of conduct. And the best way I found, and I don't think it's from Lencioni's book, but talking about my book, is think about the teammates who have fit in really well. Right? Who have you enjoyed working with, and how do they behave? Like, what makes them the teammates that you like to work with the most? And for me personally, it's like I like people who take ownership of things. I like people who are more collaborative. So I really try to find a way to hire in those ways. Other people might answer those questions differently. Other people might want cowboys. They might want people who are more solo players. It depends on the team a little bit. So think about who is fitting really well in your team, and then think about who hasn't. And what was it about the people who didn't fit in that you were trying to coach out of them? Because ideally, you don't want to be hiring people you have to coach things out of. You want to identify those things you coach for, and then make those the center of what you're hiring for. And then figure out a way to interview to get them to reveal, those pieces. So yeah, there's those couple of books. Who, the A Method of Hiring, I kind of was inspired quite a bit by their interviewing techniques. But I kind of stripped it down for tech. But kind of one of their big concepts is that you find 5 or 6 questions to ask about every project, but then ask the same set of questions about every project. The types of questions that I'll ask early on is, what technology was used? Did you agree? And how did you react if you didn't agree? Right? Because that's going to teach you a lot about, what technology they worked with, who made the decisions, how do they respond to situations where they might not agree technically, because that's one of the big things that teams fight about. What did you like about working on that team? What was challenging about working on that team? Because if you ask that type of a question over 5 projects, you're going to start to see patterns emerge about what makes this person happy, where they struggle. What do you like about your boss? If you could give your boss one piece of advice, what would it be? Will help you kind of identify the types of things that they struggle with, maybe with their boss. So you can look realistically, I'm a very hands-off leader. So if I have somebody who likes leaders who are very hands-off, then I know, this is probably somebody who's going to fit good. If they complain that too many of the leaders are too distant or aren't engaged enough or something like that, then that may be, a red flag for me that this person might not be best on one of my teams. So, there's a ton of stuff out there, but they can definitely start with my book and then dig into motivation, culture, and interviewing skills, and stay away from a lot of the basic stuff I think that's in the tech industry itself, because I think a lot of it is a little bit too geared around technical greatness and not team fit.
No, I think you're 100% right. When you have someone that's a good team fit and they have the ability to or the desire to learn, they're motivated. Like you talked about motivation. I think that they could, you can get the right person without having to dig into the tech skills. I very rarely ask very technical questions. I more ask about project questions and and those kind of things. But it seems like every time I do have to hire someone, I almost have to start from scratch one, because I forgot what the things that I asked before. So I think having a playbook, like you mentioned, would be a really good approach going forward.
I've used the same set of templates. They're actually in that book. I've used the same set of templates for about 6 years now. Every time I go to hire, I kind of like, if I'm hiring a programmer versus a BA, I might strip some stuff out of it, or I might tweak it a little bit. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, every time I go to hire, I pull up my templates, and I'll review it just to make sure, okay, this is still the types of directions I want to go. But once I kind of got that concept from the book Who, and tested it out and used it, then I've been very pleased with the results, and I haven't wanted to go back and change it. I haven't felt compelled to go back and change it. If anything, to be honest with you, people complain that my process is too long and it's a little bit too. It's weird because people like to talk about themselves, and I ask them to sit there and talk about themselves for a couple hours. But it's a little bit of a challenging interview, and I've actually had a few people that I've hired recently go, it was tough, but once they get here, they're like, okay, but now I see why, because the team is fantastic. So yeah, I haven't changed it a lot. I use the same templates I've used for a while. So yeah, figure out what works for you. Like what works for me may be a great inspiration, a starting point for you, but tweak it, figure out what works better for you, but then stick with it. There's no sense to reinvent that, every time you go to hire.
Yeah, I think I know for me, just I a couple of years ago, I took a new position, and the second interview was almost a full day, of being here. And when I was out looking for this position and other positions, I had an interview where it was less than an hour, and yet they made me an offer. And I was so hesitant I turned it down, partially because I thought that was too easy.
Yeah.
They must not be hiring good people if they're going to make a decision that quickly.
Yeah. And it's and at different points of your career, you might care about different things. Like early in my career, it was all about, I just want to go get experience in as many places as I can. So I worked with consulting companies, and I was happy to jump projects every 6 months, but after, 5 or 6 years of that, it's like, I'd really like to find some place I can settle into. But now I feel like I have an idea of what it is I want to settle into. So that can also be, there's time and a place for everything. But yeah, the faster people hire, then the less expectation I have for the quality of the team and the cohesiveness of the team and the culture and those kinds of things. I just think you have to be more deliberate if those are the things that are important to you.
Yeah. One of the things that I've heard you say before is to rehire your team about every 12 months or so as a retention strategy. What does that mean? So
one of the first things, like the very end of the first interview, my first interview with a person, I'm just trying to get a feel for what do they want out of their next position. Like, what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for them in a way that they're going to be happy, that they're going to be satisfied, that they're willing to be challenged by the right things, that they're looking for the things that I'm looking for. And I typically will make a list at the end of that first interview of about 8 or 10 things that I've kind of pulled from okay, hey, it sounds like you're looking for X. You want an opportunity to go in and own something. You want to learn some new things. You want to work on a good team. You want some flexibility in schedule. You want decent work-life balance. What are those things that are really kind of important to you? You like this particular type of technology. You're trying to get away from DBA work or whatever. But I will go pretty detailed and list out 8 or 10 things, and that's how I recap, or that's how I end the first interview with somebody. Is I'll say, this is what I got out of it. Is that right? Right? Is this what you're really looking for in your next 6 or 12 months? And I try to get to a point where they go, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. But every 6 months, so I try to do a one-on-one at least monthly, and I'll try to do a review every, twice a year if I can. Worst case, depending on what's going on, I've had some times in the past where I haven't been able to do really a big formal review except for yearly. But I will pull that out, and it always kind of freaks them out sometimes when I pull that out. And I'll pull out my notes, and I'll go, okay, this is what you told me a year ago. Like a year ago, you said these are the things that are important to you. Are these things still important to you? Or have you grown? Or are you changing? Or are, you were very interested in doing, front-end web work, but now you're starting to play around with mobile at night. Well, maybe I need to move you onto a mobile team so you don't quit and go someplace else, right? If I'm not rehiring my team, if I'm not looking at how they're changing over time, because everybody does change over time, then they're going to go find someplace else to work. They're going to go get hired someplace else that's going to let them do the things that they want to do. So why do I want to do that? Why do I want to go through that hassle of losing somebody who's a good fit just because I'm not challenging them in the right way? So I've kind of put it in the context of rehire your team every 6 to 12 months. be very deliberate about and aware of what it is that they view is a great place to work. Be very deliberate about what, they feel like they need, for them to be successful over the next 6 to 12 months, and be attuned to it changing and change with them if you can.
Yeah, that's really good. I do the annual reviews, but I haven't really thought about, going back and making sure that they're still in the same mindset that they were before. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm going to have to incorporate that in my annual review process. That's really good stuff.
Yeah.
So what are some things that you've kind of learned about leadership that you didn't know when you came in there? Some things that you thought you knew, but you were wrong about?
Well, I mean, the big one, we touched on a couple of them, which is, it's not about me, right? Leadership, a lot of us go into it and it's, our egos are wrapped up in our tech, and our egos on our ability to be the contributor. But as you become the leader, you've got to make that mind shift of it's sometimes hard when you're a team lead who's both, still coding and leading, because you have to wear two hats, and you have to be very conscious of that. That was kind of one of my bigger challenges, and one of the things I learned. Hiring, the importance of fit was a very, very, very painful lesson. And it's something, people quit, change jobs. I mean, people change jobs in this industry so much because a lot of them aren't sure what they're looking for. They just know that what they have isn't what they're looking for. So to really start paying attention to some of those aspects. And then the other thing, I think the other kind of big bucket of things that I maybe wasn't quite as prepared for is just that our success in tech is dependent upon the success of the business and the success of the broader project a lot of times. So we get so narrowly focused in tech, but if you actually sit down and you spend a lot more time with your users and a lot more time with your sponsors, then you'll realize that tech is really a small piece of this broader thing. And you can spend a year building the most elegant technical solution ever, but if the business hasn't taken care of its work, or if you've built the wrong thing or something along that line, then you've just really wasted a year of your life. And so I've gotten much more attuned to, as I'm leading technical projects, I'm leading the business, right? I'm making sure that we're building the right thing. I'm making sure that the right stakeholders are involved at the right time. I'm really pushing back hard on, do we have a change management plan? Do we have a transition plan? Like, are we really talking to real customers? Or are we just making this stuff up in our head? Because I don't want to get to the end of a year or however long this is going to be before we can fully deploy this or roll this out and have it, and have just wasted everybody's time. So that's the other piece of it is to get beyond tech. A lot of times it's not the most elegant technical solution. A lot of times it's something basic. It's fine and will work. So to really scale back your concept that tech is the most important thing, because there's bigger things that are going to hurt your project beyond what language you're using or what methodology you're using, or how you're going about doing some of those things.
Yeah, I think I remember when I was managing a web and mobile development team, and the business brought me an idea one time that I had to really push back on and challenge, partly because the people that had the idea had worked in this industry for 20 years, and they didn't realize that their customers had no idea what they were talking about. They're just everyday people that are trying to use this product and didn't speak the industry terms and didn't understand it. And I think that was one of the times where I really said, a light bulb kind of popped off in my head that leading technical team is also about making sure that what you're building is the right thing, and that sometimes the people that are responsible for that are so far into their careers in their business, and they understand that business so well that they don't realize how far they've stepped away from being a normal person.
Yeah. I had one project. It was when I was consulting, and I went in, and they were about 3 months into it when I got there, and I could tell that they were having some technical problems. So this was the first team. This was a team that had done a lot of work, I think, in Delphi years ago in VB. And this was their first, classic ASP project. And they were struggling because they were doing it the way, the book said to do it this way. But, the way the book said to do it was actually kind of complicated. It was too complicated. So they were actually struggling technically. But they handed us a stack of, stories and here's everything that we need to build, all this kind of stuff. So we start building, and we think that the stakeholders are looking at it. We think the users are looking at it, but we get about, it is going to take us like a year to build out all this type of stuff. We get about 9 months in finally before they sit down and actually start looking at it. and they go, "Who told you to build this?" Right? This is not how we work. This will not work for us. You need to go back to the drawing board, right? So we had just literally, there's a team of like 15 people that had just wasted 9 months for nothing, right? And ultimately that project got abandoned about 3 or 4 months later. And there's just nothing worse than that. There's nothing worse than, it can be the best, most elegant technical solution there is, but if it's the wrong thing or it doesn't work or it doesn't make business sense, then why bother? So you have to, I really encourage people to own that. There things I could have done earlier in that project to either reveal that or fix that? Yes. And I've learned over time what those things are. And so to me, that's where you really need to spend some of your energy on that side of being a leader as you do on, some of the technical things that are a little bit more obvious.
Yeah, I know going through something like that is very frustrating. And sometimes, like, the only thing that helps me, not get extremely frustrated whenever I have a situation like that where the product gets scrapped or the project is just kind of put on hold indefinitely, is to think that, what did I learn from this project?
Oh, yeah.
And try to take some positive out of it. Otherwise, like for me, I always think I've tried to equate dollars to time to help me manage my time better. And I start thinking, how much dollars did our company just lose?
Mm-hmm.
It's a tough thing.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I was a lead out in Silicon Valley, we had like 10 guys on that team, and I kind of figured I used half of them well, right? So this tiny little startup that didn't have that much money to begin with, I probably just burned $500,000, right? Because I was not an effective leader. Because, which again, if you go and you try to get companies to start paying for training and some of that kind of stuff, they don't ever kind of stop and go, "Oh, this could make, this could actually save us a tremendous amount of money," because if they're not leading these people and using these people well, they're very, very easily can cost entire, FTE salaries of just being unproductive or not working well.
Yeah, that's big. So as you're trying to become a better leader and save your company some money, one thing I've heard you talk about that I think is really cool is how you kind of incorporate. You mentioned before that you've learned a lot about leadership and you studied really hard on leadership, but you were studying the wrong things. Yep. And you've kind of taken some time to break things out into 4 categories of leadership or 4 levels of leadership and put those topics within those different levels. What are those 4 levels of leadership and how do they kind of vary as you go up in your career?
Yeah. So I mean, the biggest problem, and I spent a lot of the summer interviewing other developers, just trying to understand this problem from their perspective, and the same problem I had, and hopefully it's not confirmation bias. Hopefully I didn't just go research a bunch of people and project my problem onto them. But no. So if you search Amazon for leadership, you'll get 60,000 results. And that doesn't mean there's only 60,000. That means Amazon stops counting at 60,000, right? You go search Google for leadership, and there's just countless topics and articles and people. And it's like, so where do you even know where to start? And the problem I had is I studied a lot about leadership, but I studied the entrepreneurship side of leadership. I didn't really study the how do I lead people side of leadership. So part of it is dependent upon what do you want to do. Are you, as I was going out to lead a team of 6 or 8 or 2 people, there's a different set of skills you might want to learn. If you're going to go start a company where you're going to be the only person working at it for the next 6 months, then there's maybe some entrepreneur stuff that you need to study more than even leading a team. But the 4 levels that I've kind of broken this down to, and this is, my goal, I've got a site called learnleadership.org that I've been piecing together and that I'm going to continue working on here in the next few months, but is to help kind of give people a roadmap. There is such a huge domain and it's so complicated that, here's a roadmap based on what you're trying to accomplish, where you're trying to go in your career, what you're trying to do next. Here's what would probably make sense for you to study next. So the 4 levels are, first level is called lead yourself, which in a lot of ways is how do I become a role model for my team, right? How do I have to be a good problem solver and I have to make good decisions and I have to be a good learner before I can teach my team to make good decisions and solve problems well and to be a good learner. I have to develop my own emotional intelligence before I can coach my team on how they can better improve their own emotional intelligence. So there's 7, 8, 10 things within that lead yourself category: time management, information management, habits and routines, self-marketing, some of those pieces that just help you get that foundation in place to become a leader, no matter what direction your leadership takes you. Okay. And the second tier is called lead a team, which when you get into team leadership, it's really about what is the vision, where are we going, And then what boundaries do I want to put on the team? Because you don't want the team going completely left field. You want to give them autonomy to play the game, but you've got to give them some basic rules of the game. So what's the vision and what are the boundaries? How do you do it with motivation? How does culture impact motivation? How do you delegate? How do you coach without destroying motivation? How do you run meetings well? How do you manage projects? How do you know what project management methodology is right for the right projects? How do you hire? So there's, again, another 10, 12 things that you can lump within that kind of, as you start to take on more team leadership responsibilities, you get into more of those. If you stay more in the corporate world, there's kind of that next level up, which is more director and vice president, which is kind of where I am now, which is, I'm not really technical as much, but I'm still leading a function, but it gets much more into, how do I take the broader organization strategy and apply it to our function? How do I deal with product management? How do I deal with projects, multiple projects over years and how they form a product? Resource planning, personnel development. How do I help my team grow? How do I grow them in the direction that the business needs them to be in 2 or 3 years? How to deal with budget and financing, negotiation, change management. Some of those kinds of things really become important when you're in that, more mid to senior level technical leadership. And then, so that's the third level, is lead a department. A fourth level is lead an organization, which is more entrepreneurship, or even, now I'm kind of a blend between lead a department and lead an organization, which is more the vision strategy. Where are we going as an organization? Why do we make the decisions to pursue these 2 or 3 initiatives instead of these other 20 initiatives that we've intentionally said we're not going to play in those fields? How do you lead cross-discipline? How do you, business development, marketing, some of those kinds of things become more important, even if your function isn't, native to those. Operations and execution, a broader look at that. Relationships, a lot of organizational leadership. You can't solve every problem by yourself within your organization. So how do you work with other organizations? How do you form partnerships and some of those things? Financial, governance, legal. So you get into more of those as you start thinking maybe more entrepreneurship, or if you've grown up into more the senior ranks of leadership within an organization, and those types of topics become more important. So what I want to do is to lay this map out, and then lay out within those some resources that I've found to be high yield, or that the community has found to be high yield, because I personally don't know all this stuff as well. So we're piecing this together. Hopefully we've taken some steps in the last 6 months. Hopefully in the next 6 months we can take some more big steps. But I think this will hopefully help people not study the wrong things, and will help people become an effective leader faster. That's ultimately my goal.
Yeah, that's good. I think we have very similar missions and goals when it comes to creating leaders, especially in the tech area, because I think that's when you go to school for business, you learn a little bit about management and leadership, but when you go to school for computer science, you really don't learn that much about it. And all these movies and shows come out, they make you think that there's some solo coder that's kind of running everything.
Yeah, and it's slightly different in tech, right? So. Well, every function is going to have their own differences, but tech definitely has its own differences. Like when I start, mixing a team together, I have to be very conscious about, are they innovative or are they more mainstream, right? If I take people who love playing with the latest technologies and put them on a team with people who would rather stay 2 or 3 years behind, then they're just going to fight all the time, right? If I have, 2 different people who both want, technical and architectural control, and they disagree, then they're just going to fight all the time. Do I have the right mix of business oriented versus technical oriented? The right mix of high level or low level for my unique project. So you get into some of that stuff too in tech that is that you're probably not going to get that in school, because most school is a little bit more generic. And so hopefully, I've seen you do some stuff, I've seen others do some stuff. Hopefully we can start pulling together some of those unique to tech leadership things that ultimately will again help people get there faster and make less mistakes along the way.
Yeah, I think there's another thing that you were kind of hitting on. I don't know if it's in between the lead a department or lead an organization, but one thing about tech, when I think about other departments, now that I'm in a role where I'm overall of IT and I'm having to work with other leaders in different departments, I get into some of those thoughts where I can kind of figure out what someone in marketing does, and I can kind of figure out and understand what people in accounting do, and I can kind of figure out what people in finance and in legal and other departments do. But a lot of times my peers in those departments can't quite understand or even fathom what some of the people in my department do, And it's because tech is so much different than a lot of those other disciplines.
Yeah, and I think you get the fear. Like people just are afraid of tech. And so I think that it's probably not as different as they think, but I think that a lot of them are just afraid of it. And part of that may be the people of tech. Like some of us are kind of grumpy and scary, and my personality type is a INTJ, which we're kind of the quiet, introverted, smart but grumpy, and it's
I'm right there with you.
Right.
I've been called a grumpy old geek many times.
Yeah, so it's like and that's where like emotional intelligence becomes very important to develop even very early in your career, to understand, okay, this is my personality type. This is how I respond to certain triggers. Some of my natural responses are healthy, and some might not be healthy, or some might not be in the right situations. And that if I want to play well with others, and if I want to have a long and productive career, and if I want to get the raise, and if I want to get the promotion, and I want to have a long career in this industry, then I've got to learn what my triggers are, good and bad, and learn how to start managing those. And and that's kind of the heart of emotional intelligence, some of those kinds of things. So yeah, I think the more we could fix that as a department, I think the less other departments would be afraid of us too.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that all comes down to leadership, which is what we've been talking about this whole time.
Yeah.
So, what tips do you have? Because a lot of our audience are team leads, or want to be team leads, or maybe they've moved into a manager or director role, and trying to figure out, what should I be doing? What are some skills that these leaders need to have that they don't typically have, that you see it's kind of like a big deficit, that are like the first things you should start and figure out?
I think the first thing is to get over tech, right? I call it second order thinking, and I had this conversation a few days ago with somebody that I see a lot of technical people missing the second order thinking, which a lot of people go, that's crazy. We're really good at thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, but they're good at thinking a step or two ahead technically, but they're not always good at looking at the ramifications tech has on other things. Mm-hmm. This choice has these things outside of tech, and it ripples out of these ways. So to really start to pay attention to your customers and their needs, what do they really want, what do they really need, and start looking at the decisions you're made from their perspective and the perspective of their experience and their goals and what they want, and start looking at those ripples and start thinking more steps ahead. Be willing to give up control. You feel like as a leader, hey, I get control, right? But the best leaders give it up. I make sure my team is pointing in the right direction. I make sure that they're making good decisions and asking the right questions. There are times that I'll step in and just check things, just to, sometimes a little bit more aggressively, sometimes less, but it's just get out of their way. Let them help you. And if you won't get out of the way, they can't do that. So, those are a couple of things that I think pop into my head first.
Yeah, that's good. I was actually having a conversation with someone the other day about second order thinking in tech. And one of the things they said that kind of struck me a little bit differently, because, being an IT director and having security, kind of the network security under my control, we also talk about, we always say no. We always want to, prevent people from doing things. And he said, well, why don't you work at, trying to say yes instead of always trying to say no? Let's work at what can we do to make this a yes instead of a no. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's one thing I never really thought about.
Yeah, it's if you look at a lot of the trends and don't look at the trends in tech, look at the trends and how business is using tech. And there has been a lot of in the last 5 to 8 years of businesses jumping onto third party things, and they're doing it because their internal tech isn't supporting them in the way that they want. And I think I can't say we're getting better or not. I know that I'm very conscious about trying to make sure that we aren't just saying no, or that we're trying to find solutions. But a lot of times businesses are starting to work around us, whether we want them to or not. And that's so that's good and bad. But yeah, it's being a leader in tech is about a lot more than just tech. And that's one of the harder things I think for people to grasp and to learn and to fully understand. There's also a lot of variety. Look for, a startup needs you to behave in a different way than a turnaround. Right. The startup, you're channeling energy in a positive way. A turnaround, you're bringing energy and hope back. So and that applies both to business and to tech as well. So that's another good thing I think, is to start paying attention to some of those things, and that goes again beyond tech.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and that's one of the things that I think once you get past that leading your team and you're moving into your department, you have to understand that it's not all about tech, it's not all about the technologies that you use, but it's about solving business problems and understanding the business's needs, intimately. Makes a big difference.
Yep.
Well, I've really enjoyed this talk. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with that you think is just that we've missed, we haven't covered about leadership?
No, I mean, the only thing I will say is and it kind of goes back to hiring and goes back to some of those kind of things, is to discover and embrace your authentic self, right? If you're a department, if you're an organization, or if you're a person, right? We kind of feel like, especially in hiring, we'll go look at other job descriptions and we'll just mimic what they do in their job descriptions. But what that's doing is kind of defeating the purpose of the more authentic we can be as an organization or as a team, and then the more authentic we can inspire people to be that are trying to come into our team or organization. What you're looking for, the magic, is when you have an authentic team, an authentic person, and there's a match there, then that's magic, right? Mm-hmm. You get a really good situation for everybody. But too often, we're trying to live to some ideal that we think the industry has for us, or some ideal of what we think a team is supposed to be, instead of just being our authentic self. And so, if there's one thing I'll leave you with, it's figure out, what that is for you as a technologist. And there's a lot of variety, and there's a lot of room for variety, right? Not everybody should be the same, so embrace that you're not, but then, be conscious about trying to find those places where you're going to fit in best.
That's really good stuff. I know when I think about authenticity, people that try to fit the mold, and I think we do that when we're looking for a job. We try to see what is the person looking for, and let's be that instead of just being ourselves. But when you do that for so long, you lose your happiness. That defeats happiness altogether, and you'll never be happy in a job or in a career if you're not yourself.
Exactly. And as a leader, you're not going to be happy with your team if you were inauthentic when you hired them. And they're expecting something of you that you can't give them on a regular basis. Yeah,
that's absolutely right. Absolutely right. All right. Well, Scott, can you tell people how they can find out more about you, where they can check out your website and your book and your learnleadership.org?
Yeah, sure. The book is on Amazon. It's called the Programmer Hiring Playbook. Learnleadership.org is where I've put up the work to date on the tracks and those types of things, and we'll be building that out. Like I said, in the months ahead, I will be speaking at Knox.net. I'll be down in Knoxville next month speaking at their meetup. And I'll be speaking to some more meetups this fall, mostly around the Midwest and probably the Southeast. And then some of the bigger conferences I'm trying to get into for 2019. So, if you're at conferences, keep an eye out for me and then stop by and say hello. And I'd love to hear your stories and get your feedback and learn from you as much as you guys can hopefully learn a little bit from me.
All right, that sounds good. And I'm going to link up your Twitter and your websites as well as your book in the show notes so people can go there and just click through. And I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
You got it, man. Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity. Appreciate the time.